Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Good day, everybody. My name is Martin Hunter. I am the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate strategy into frontline operations. Today, my guest, Esther. Thank you for being on the show, Esther.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Esther is the founder and chief leadership development officer of the Ready Zone. That has been 20 years in the making, something like that, right? It's evolved, it's changed, like everything. It's always been in constant motion. I can't wait for you guys to listen to what Esther's been doing with zone performance indicators, ZPIs, which I absolutely love and want to digest. Esther, what's the name of your book as well?
It's called Better Leaders, Better People, Better Results, 6 Eye-Opening Strategies to Thrive Through Change You Did Not Ask For.
And there's a picture of her cross-arm, giving her, that professional look behind that as well, Esther. I love it. I love it. So thank you very much for being on the show again. We're going to have a hoot today. Esther, what is the title of the show? What would you like to call the show today?
Well, it should technically be called Just the Greatest Thinkers of All Time.
Booyah.
If we're being serious, which I know how much you love to do, Martin, I would say how to be ready to powerfully lead through change you didn't ask for.
You did not ask for.
Yeah.
You did not ask for. That's
or maybe things you did ask for, but most of it you don't ask for.
Anybody who's got a dog, anybody who's a parent, and is like, oh, I want a kid, I want a dog. It's like, yeah, you know what? You didn't ask for that part. I thought Esther was going to say the M word, but hey, for those who know me, . Esther, let's start. If somebody's listening and they know you, hopefully people are listening, that know you.
Yeah.
What is a one thing that most people, even the closest friends, don't know about you?
That I play piano.
What? Sweet. And you play piano well, I'm assuming?
Well, no, I think it's more of, it's so funny because when I was a kid, I had lessons and I think my mother would say, it sounded like you were banging on the piano. And then if I remember a few years ago, I was at a retreat and it was at this retreat center in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And I went into one room, it was in a church, and there was a piano and I sat down to just play. And ever since then, just for some reason, I found this great way of riffing off and being creative through music, which I hadn't known, hadn't discovered. And most people wouldn't know it about me at all because I don't normally play piano. So it's not a thing that people would know. Even my closest friends probably wouldn't know.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. If you were to ask me to play an instrument and you were holding a gun against my head, I would say shoot, because your ears are going to bleed. I love music. I think, the older I get, maybe as I get older, but the more the piano, the cello, the guitar, the acoustics of those, a fiddle, I'm from the East Coast. So a fiddle, a violin, I think there's just this, it takes you to a different place. And I can only assume that people who play instrument puts you in compared to business, it puts you change brain hemispheres completely. Like you have to be creative, and not that you're not creative in business, but it's more logical on that side. And then playing the instrument is just absolutely lovely, and how people can go from one side to another. Much smarter than me, that's for sure.
Well, it's so funny because we run a creative leadership program for marketing and for marketing leaders, mid-level. Excuse me. And it was so interesting because whenever we start the program, we started very intimately and people bring things that really reveal something very foundational about them. And I would say we've run this program. This is the 7th year we're running the program. We've had about 100 people who've graduated in the program. And what's so fascinating that 90% of all of these marketers always come with something to do with music.
Oh, no way.
Always. And then it's so interesting because then someone will say, like this group that we launched a few weeks ago, one woman said, I'm a big fan of Pearl Jam. And then all of a sudden you saw eyes wide open. A few people would say, they would start introducing themselves and they would say, oh, I'm a lover of Pearl Jam. I was at that first concert that you went to also. And then before you know it, all these people are commenting about different kinds of music that they love. And I think it's part of a creative spirit too.
Oh my, I got goosebumps because I think my favorite songs of all time is from Pearl Jam called Just Breathe. And I know it's very dark and dreary. It's about somebody dying and stuff like that. And same thing with this new song called Deathbed. But anyways, favorite song of all time. That Eddie Vedder has such a deep voice that takes you in a different place. It's important. We're kind of going on a tangent here, but it's important, I think, that as you mentioned, to be varied in skills. And I think that if we look at the Ready Zone performance indicators, that is a very powerful mindset to have, to be well balanced, because that's what the Ready Zone does. It gives you a holistic approach and a good balanced view of your business and the culture within your business. So
yeah, it's interesting to hear you say it, because I think it's so funny, because going back to the title that you and I were joking around about a few minutes ago, the title of the podcast, but the one thing that we had found was that most leaders, I don't like to say all, because always someone will say to me, well, not me. So most leaders that we work with, I would say, are very confronted. And I would say before COVID, not just in COVID, by how do we really lead powerfully to be able to be more anticipatory or be more resilient in this environment where we don't know what's coming at us, because we can only be able to forecast so much. I mean, you know this so well, Martin, in the work you do, right? You can only forecast so much. And so what are those, how do you actually set yourself up, your team up, and your organization up to be able to be that resilient through all of what's happening? And we're seeing it before. The reason why I say before COVID is because technology, economics has created, political factors has created this level of change everywhere. That's not a one-time event. So what we've said is, how do you do it? You set up organizational workplaces where trust, respect, and psychological safety is valued, which no one would really argue with, because everyone's like, of course. But there is measured as the bottom line. I think that's where you and I align on, is how do you actually create this place where you can actually diagnose it, where you could see it, and you can contextualize it. Because once you see it, it's hard to unsee it. And everyone wants to be able to put things in categories and boxes so it's manageable. And that's where the zone performance indicators came out of. It was born out of this notion of, okay, how do we actually really diagnose in a very smart way to be able to see the environment in the way that we need to be able to effectuate change in new ways? So we created these 6 zone performance indicators to be able to do that. So that's why a leader can then look at either individually, me, because we always say, look in the mirror first, as Jim Collins always said, and how do you then be able to really look at your team and be on the forefront of that with them? And then how do you do so with your organization? And how do you do it? What we talk about it, how do you do it all the time? Because sometimes at companies, they may say, oh, let's do a 360 assessment. Let's do a culture survey. Let's do a climate survey. But I'm like, okay, those things are like a one-time event. Being on the pulse of what's happening on a moment by moment basis is what the zone performance indicators, is ZPIs, as you say, or I'd say in America, ZPIs, actually will affectionately give you in a very practical, pragmatic way.
There's so many things from this little conversation. One, resilience is an emotional state, right? It's like morale. So people underestimate the power of morale. Morale, according to the definition, is the willingness and desire of an individual or team to accomplish a task or mission as an individual or as a goal.
Mhm.
So when you say morale is good within culture, is to say, well, if you have and then culture is such a broad term.
Yeah. So
You
we should
have
define
an organization that is ready and willing to go the extra mile for you, you'll get an extra 10%. So if you treat people with dignity and respect, as simple as that, like you said, psychological safety, trust, and what was the other one?
respect, trust, respect.
Right?
Mhm.
And so you do all of that, then morale will be there. If morale is there, then the sense of accomplishment is there. What does accomplishment bring? Extra goals, deliverables, achieving more, right? So you want to talk about growth, focus on that. I mean, 90% of businesses are 90 plus percent of businesses have 90% plus human contribution, meaning that there's no
Yes,
robots, there's
that's right.
production is there. So you're saying, three quarter, 3/4 of 3/4 of 3/4 of 3/4. That means that, almost 100% of all businesses count on human beings to deliver their products or services. So that resilience is an emotional state. So why not use that? I mean, Esther and I always talk about there's two things that you have: transactional KPIs. That's what's your bottom
Absolutely.
line. And that's, you have to have some type of financial
100%.
count the widgets, how many widgets. The other component is how transformational are you, and what are you doing to measure how you're improving human performance within that company. So, I mean, that's so let's go back. We like poof, everybody take a deep breath because we just pushed you right in the deep end. So how about we just, all right, everybody, here's a life support. Let's take you in the shallow end of the pool. Esther, how did all of this start? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from? Where did you come up with zone? Is it ZPIs, the zone performance, and the ready zone? Sorry, you know what? It is what it is. I say Z, you say Z. I don't know what the Australians say, but
Well,
proper English.
so to answer your question, so it's let's see if I can do this in an abbreviated way, but we'll see, because you always giggle when I talk about it, which is, so I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. So that's part of the accent that you hear a little bit in my voice. Very
Hard ass.
proudly born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and a proud New Yorker, I will say, like many. And I grew up in the world, my first work before I did the work that we'll talk about in a minute, I was on the marketing and PR side of things. So initially working for 12 different kinds of brands, both in packaged goods and entertainment, like magazines, publishing, and then I transitioned to work in PR for an agency in New York, and we started doing entertainment work, which was just great fun. We were doing things for the cable business at the time, because it was a long time ago. We were doing it for the cable business for many years. And so I worked for that agency and then transitioned out and worked for a financial services company doing marketing, PR, and advertising, and then went back to the industry working for little brands that you may know called Fox Broadcasting Company, and then and also for Disney, which was an incredible. And by the time I left Disney, I was the head of communications for all of their owned properties, which at the time, like many big behemoth conglomerates like Disney is, we had at the time about 6 or so networks that we had. And so the person I reported to oversaw all those brands. And so I did the publicity for the ones we wholly owned, which was about 3 of them. But then I did have responsibilities over about 7 or 8 of them. So it was a huge job with an enormous amount of responsibilities. And I did leave Disney. And when I left Disney, I was in this place of thinking I was going to start my own business, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I really didn't. I didn't know what it was to be an entrepreneur. And I kind of stumbled as I was making my way. I got into the hands of a woman who was interviewing me one day. And she said, it really sounds like you should be an executive coach. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. So I wound up, and at the time, no one was doing it. So I wound up going to school and got certified and credentialed in it, and then wound up starting a leadership development company, because coaching's only one small slice of it. And then I wound up working globally in the Middle East and in Africa, doing powerful projects. I moved to Uganda, Africa a few years ago, and did work for AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis projects, and diagnosing children's rights in Uganda. It was quite a journey. And so it was interesting, because when I came back from Uganda, I thought I was going to live there forever. But when I came back to Uganda, I had this aha moment in Uganda, which I know probably is going to sound a little strange, where it finally hit me that what's the one thing that people want, no matter who you are, is they want human dignity. People want to be valued for who they are. And how do you really value that? Well, there's the components that you and I talked about. People want to feel like they're respected. They want to feel they're trusted, and they want to feel psychologically safe. Otherwise, they can't perform. And if they have that, a leader can lead you into the desert, and they'll know that they alongside with you, they'll find their way out. And so from there, the body of work of the Ready Zone really was born, just from that simple notion. Because once we started to explore that notion and almost like test it on a regular basis inside of companies, because people just kept telling us the same thing, but using different language. So language like, I don't know how to be more resilient, or, we just reorganized our division, but for some reason, the two leaders that are supposed to run it actually can't run it in harmony. Or, you know what, we're actually about to go through a massive merger with another multi-billion-dollar organization. And now all of these divisions are going to have to form together, and people are going to now have to figure out actually how to work together in a way that sustains the culture. So on and on and on, you're hearing it, and they're basically saying the same things. And so what we saw was, what were the key things that we were working on all the time that was foundational in the sustainability with folks, about what they were suffering through, what they were joyously celebrating, and what they were excited about. Well, one is their level of shiftability. How do we shift and be chameleons, no matter what the climate is, the business climate and the internal people climate is? How do we actually have a level of emotional agility, so we're responding rather than reacting? The context of our work is legacy driven, and we have boundaries enough within the organization that I have boundaries, our team does, our organization does, so that we can sustain the economic fluctuations. Then people also have the level of visibility and visibility, so they can actually influence and effectuate change through relationships and through people. Then the way that we communicate, that people actually take their responsibility for knowing that communication is through emotions, through your body, and through your language. And so do you actually mean what you say and say what you mean? And elements of that is like feedback or tough conversations. And then how do we build teams that have common vision? They have a team commitment, so that they know what they're committed to doing together, that they have an impact guide, so they know how they're working together. And through that, they can create real powerfully impactful teams that change the environment that they're in. And then the last bit is, how do we actually take care of each other? So if I see you struggling, I don't go, that's Martin's problem. But actually, that we create a culture where people are invested in coaching and mentoring each other. So people are learning. So there's constant growth and evolution of the business, innovation, and creativity. So once we saw that, we're like, okay, a huge light bulb went off. That's where the ZPIs came from. So each of those elements that I described are each of what those ZPIs are. So that's how we came to, and we thought, well, if we create a formula for it, then it'll have more resonance for people, so that people like yourself, who could be a CEO of an organization, could say, where do we need to grow? Where do we need to shore up? And then where do we need to align? So that's where it came from.
Who's Disney?
Small company.
Itsy bitsy. Africa changes you, right?
It was so funny. The moment I got to Uganda, and I remember it was so interesting, because it's like we were speaking the same English language, but we meant very different things. And it was so interesting, because the nuance of the English language was different.
Yeah.
The what people valued was so much more profound. And it was interesting because in Uganda, people didn't take you seriously unless they saw you. So getting on the phone with people or any of these virtual communications at that time was not really like, people actually you had to show up for people to take you seriously. And by that, the level of relationships and community was, and building community in Africa was really foundational.
What I found about Africa was the power of conversation, because there's so little. So I've been there, had security guards, and I would go to security outposts, right, on mine sites. And, as an executive, I'd like to meet everybody, right? So I'd go to each security post at night, and drilling areas, the mining. And the most that I love was to go hang out with the security guys, because they would make a fire, and then they'd make green tea, super sweet green tea. And so they'd fill the kettle up with a whole bunch of tea, and then they'd fill the kettle up with a whole bunch of sugar. And it'd take an hour to make like 4 cups of tea, but like itsy bitsy little tea. And, but the conversation associated with it was always, where are you from? What do you do? Right. In Western Africa, half are Christian, half are Muslim.
Yes.
And so it's funny because on mine sites, you'd say the Christian people would celebrate the Muslim holidays, and then we have the Muslim people celebrate the Christian holidays. So everybody was always off all the time. So trying to get anything accomplished was
good luck.
I still absolutely love. So one thing that I learned about, and I want to talk about a company called Decra Insight that does fabulous behavioral-based safety. Anyways, so Ibrahim Njai, 4 wives, 23 kids. Okay. He says, Martin, when I said, man, oh man, I got 1 wife. And how do you deal with 4 wives? He says, every time I tell them they're special, and I give him we'll say $5, right? And says, you're my special person, and give you $5. And then he does that with all 4. So when there's a discord, he goes, who's my favorite? They all put their hands up. They go, who did I give $5 to? They all put their hands up. And he says, you see, you treat everybody the same. And so by treating everybody the same, with the same respect, dignity, and all of that, regardless of how advanced you think your company is, or how simple the fundamental structure. Like, I mean, this guy was running a company. He had 4 wives, 23 kids. Like, he didn't own anything. He had 4 houses, but each of the houses were assigned to his wife, right? So, and then all the kids went to school. And I was like, how do you afford all of that?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The salary that we give you. And so anyways, so long story short, he ran it like an organization with that trust, that sense of safety, psychological safety, the dignity that each of the women, like, we view things in North America. Oh my goodness, it's so indignant to have 4 wives. That's the culture that they accept. Now, don't get me wrong. There's pros and cons on either side. He was a good man. He really and honestly was a good man. And so that, for me, Africa changed me. The grounds, the geographic situation. Africa is a different place, but ultimately on the people side of things, people gave you everything. They had nothing, and they would give you absolutely everything all the time. And for what? To share stories. To share stories. So that I think that's what I wanted to bring about the conversation, because that is the fundamental measurement, or how you can measure performance, is through conversations. It's not just by measuring how much did we make, how much did we lose. Is to have conversations about continuous improvement.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting what you're talking about, because McKinsey recently came out with a report on the future of work past COVID. And they cited specifically that workers are going to need more social and emotional skills in order to move into occupations in higher wage brackets. And they were saying that the demand for social and emotional skills may grow across many companies like the US, the UK, France, China, India, Spain. And so when you have companies like Google or Hilton or IBM now focus more on skills rather than degrees, this is even more significant, what
I
we're talking
agree.
about. Mhm.
There's a big company here in Vancouver called Hootsuite. And do you
Oh,
know
I know
Hootsuite?
they are. Mhm.
Yeah.
Sure.
So Hootsuite, I do business. I got an email from them on July 4th, I think, or 5th or something like that.
Uh-huh.
It said, please don't look for us, any of us, none
Oh,
of us. We're shutting it down. We've worked our asses off.
it's great.
And they said, we shut the entire company down for an entire week. Now, previously, if they were, whipping people into getting work done, and I'm not part of that. I don't understand what the historical parts of, pushing the people to get to a point where you have to have the entire week. There might be some context, but when you look at what they've done and taken the entire week off and say, hey, everybody, get out, get out, go rest. You've worked hard. It's again, it's that positioning where people are now going to, with a fight for skill-based employees now. Ho,
Oh,
ho,
yeah,
ho,
we're in it. You're in
ho.
it.
If
But
if you're not, if you're, and people think that having a ping pong table is going to make them better. It's not about that. It's about the conversation. It's about how you treat them. You can give them beer taps all you want. It's not what people want. They want that human connection. Do you, Lisa Will was a guest of mine a few episodes back, and she said, do you hear me? Do you see me? Do I matter? And that's what
Mhm.
everybody needs. Everybody needs.
Well, I think also it's interesting because it flies in the face of the whole concept of change management, because it's interesting we were talking about, because 3/4 of organizations struggle to execute business strategy. And that was before COVID.
Mhm.
77% of companies were ill prepared to deal with business disruption before COVID. A third of senior leaders said that they were completely burnt out before COVID. 900 billion, they say, is wasted on failed transformations every single year before COVID. So if you think about what you're talking about, and actually you have this culture that we're talking about, it's a crazy system, because there's still hierarchical structures that don't allow even for feedback, if you're
Mhm.
thinking about that way. There's still top down, command and control. People feel less free inside of companies. And you're talking about is actually, how do you give people greater level? I mean, I'm giving you an example with
Mhm.
feedback, but how do you give people greater levels of freedom inside of the organization so they can do their job, because we are on a talent race. And so it's just, it's so interesting, because I talk a lot about having a portable culture, because that actually creates a level of maximum resilience. It creates staying power. It can be pliable in the face of change. It's attractive to people no matter where you're working. It creates a level of retention, because it's far more costly to go out and buy and get new people rather than retain the people you have.
Mhm.
And so it's almost like it's shiftable, it's unbreakable and unshakable, because your job as a leader to ensure that the culture is elastic enough, mindfully, to ensure that that there's room to reshape, realign, and reset no matter what the situation is. And
I
so it's interesting, because we're creating a mentorship program inside a global real estate and entertainment company. And we talk a lot about this concept of culture. And the way that we define it is, can you imagine, like I was saying earlier, an organization where everyone is invested in developing and up-leveling themselves. So the
Mhm.
mentorship program that we're creating, it's not like, I'm just paired with Martin and look at what he's doing for me. No, that's not true. The responsibility that we have, that we've set out, is number one, we up-level the mentors, the senior leaders, more than we actually do the mentees. What
Mhm.
we actually do is we foster a legacy where we're saying mentors to mentees, I'm sorry, mentees to mentors,
Mhm.
mentors to champions. So this way it starts then breeding this this kind of culture where everyone's in the business of caring for each other. So it is a level, and you can measure that, because if you go to measure your level of retention, you'll actually see that there's greater levels of retention if you're doing just what we're talking about. Now, it takes a lot of effort, but to have the intention to start building that capacity and capability inside the organization does, I mean, it's going to save you a ton of money, because just think how much it's going to be if you have 10% of your workforce that leaves. I just had a client that say to me, we had 10% of our workforce go.
There's
Just imagine now recruiting.
I think the biggest thing is evolution, right? So many leaders forget that. So the Japanese have been doing this thing called senpai kohai, like the Jedi Master and the Apprentice, for as long as back post-war, right? So it's a senpai's, the senior person, to identify a kohai. If you're a kohai, you need to identify yourself as a senpai, or you need to evolve from being a kohai to senpai, and all the way through. So that caring of individuals within the organization is critical. So the point that I was getting to is that organizations and leaders now have to come to realize that you manage systems and you lead people. And the leadership component should be more than half. You can't lead from an office. You have to meet people. And although Zoom is great, and absolutely, you don't necessarily, people, I think the world's realized that you don't have to be face to face for every single relationship, where you have to be on an airplane and kill yourself and through stress and being a jockey like that. But on the other hand, the benefit of having clear and consistent communication, right? We focus all the time when we go into an organization, say, what's your competency matrix? They go, what? Well, when you hire somebody, they're at this stage. What's the level of learning, learning the expectation, meeting the expectation, exceeding the expectation, and then teaching the expectation all through the levels of the business. And then we say, okay, where's your code of conduct? And they go, what? Where's your code of conduct? You have core values, right? They all say, yes, we have blah, blah, blah. Okay. Every core value should have a list of behaviors that are to-dos or enabling to the business. And so with that being said, you can build your performance management framework because your culture is identified by those core behaviors. And then you improve those skills. So then you have your weekly one-on-ones, and then you say, okay, what expectations did you have? Then we implement kind of an agile process. What did you do yesterday? What did you do today? What are the barriers in regards to the expectation? And how can I help you? I think too many leaders forget that their job is to facilitate and elevate. Facilitate the work and elevate the individual. Because hard work has to be celebrated. I just want to finish with this. Hard work should be celebrated. When we say culture and best part, it's not about, hey, I'm going to hire you, give you $400,000 a year to do nothing. No. That's not what we're saying. We're going to treat you with dignity and respect. You're going to have functional accountabilities, and you have to perform to those accountabilities. And people love hard work. They also need to be recognized for that hard work as well. And a balance.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. The one twist that throwing in the mix of what you're saying is that the one thing that I find time and time again is that what's missing in the formula is that we're very fixated on how we measure and how we do performance in terms of almost like equations, A plus B equals C. But since we're dealing with people, what happens is that there's not patience for the stuckness. What happens is that if I am going to be asked to do something new, plain things happen. Do I have this capacity? Do I have the capability to be able to do it? And is it clear to me? Are the expectations clear to me? Those are probably common things that make sense. And so you clean up a few of those things down the way. But the thing that we forget is that we're asking people to do things that when they get stuck, we want to fix them like a carburetor. We have the answer. I'm your leader. I have the answer for you about what you want to do. And that's actually one thing that inhibits growth is that I have the answer for you.
Absolutely.
So we have to actually change the lens of performance, because the lens of performance is not in the doing, it's who you're being. Unless we actually start shifting and developing leaders into who you're being, the doing will never change. And let me give you a very practical example so this doesn't sound so damn theoretical. So we talk a lot about, when we talk about Pivot Ready, we talk about this concept of pivot moments. So anyone can change for a moment. It's not a lot to ask, like 60 seconds, you can actually shift in a moment, because lots of times when we talk about this concept of doing something new or doing something different or performance, it's almost like too out of my box, and the reactivity will get in the way of it. So what I find is that we teach this concept of pivot moments. So here's what I mean. It's made up of looking at what your current reality is. That comes about how you feel about the change or your emotions, how you experience the change or your actions or inactions you're taking that may support the changes or not. And then if you're really honest with yourself, you can see if your output is a match to your intention. So like, for example, like I was meeting with a woman named Aisha the other day who's gotten increasingly frustrated with her boss, Jamila. Jamila is the president of content at a large company, and she's increasingly frustrated that Jamila can't make decisions. She vacillates, or she can't handle conflict. And Aisha is the number 2 in the department. And so what Aisha does, she steps in, she starts making strategic decisions, because what else would you do?
Yeah, of course.
And so what happens is she's, or sheer frustration, or she looks to manage one of her peers who's also someone who can't make decisions. So for a high performer, the situation is escalated. So Aisha said to me, look, my intention for my relationship with my boss is that I want to be able to manage up with ease. I want to be a collaborator, and I want to step away when I'm frustrated rather than enabling. So we talked about what her emotions are. She said, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed, I'm really afraid. When I asked her what her experiences was with her boss, she said, look, she doesn't know how to manage or lead. Her lack of decision-making is going to get us into trouble where we're going to be losing cash soon. She isn't strategic, and she also has a huge ego and leads with it. So when I asked her what actions, if she really had to look at it, was she taking to support her intention of managing up, being a collaborator, she laughed and she's like, look, I'm stepping in to make decisions where it's not really appropriate. When it was time to present a reorganization plan to her boss, she was actually needing to partner with her peer who's not strategic. She just stepped in and actually created the strategy plan. And she wasn't going to tell her boss about all the frustrations, and she was thinking about leaving. So when I asked her, what does she see is possible now, that she sees something for what it is, not for what she prefers, then she can examine what the possibility is. So for her, it was, hey, it's really possible now that, and when I talk about when you see what's possible, then you can get into a sea of opportunity, which is what do you need to stop and start doing?
Yeah.
So that's what she was then she could do that in order to be able to elevate her relationship with her boss. So that's just a very practical formula for what to do when you're actually either leading someone else who's getting stuck. If you're in a sea of performance, asked to do things that's new for you and you get stuck, it's a short formula that works every single time.
I always give this speech to a lot of leaders. It's okay. When I was a corporate jockey and I would fly from Monday to Friday, I would get home on Friday lunchtime, and the first thing that I would do was go to my office to close out all my reports and make sure that my teams were all set for Monday morning. So then I asked the question to the group, what's my intention? And everybody say, well, get shit done, close the week off so that you can spend the weekend with your wife and your kids. Yeah, that's my intention. What do you think Tracy thought? And they said, and people put their hand up, like, you don't give a shit about her. Like, you don't give a shit about the kids. All you care about is work. You've been away from Monday through Friday. She's been with the kids all week. She's been dealing with all of the ups and downs. And now you're home and you jump in your office. And she says, all you can think about is work. So am I being judged on my intentions or my actions? My actions. So hold on a second. What happens if I would come home, take 5 minutes to clarify expectation and to give feedback? Say, hey, babe, let's have a coffee here. I just got back. Hey, what I would like to do is close my projects out, close everything out so that I can spend the weekend with the kids and you. What do you think? Open-ended question, right? Tracy might say, you know what, that's a good idea. Or maybe, hold on, Martin, can you have lunch with us? And then after lunch, then we can go. So we're soliciting feedback and direction, right? For the betterment of the relationship, not the betterment of performance, the betterment of the relationship, because relationship is more important than the production. So then what happens is I always tell leaders, are you rescuing or are you truly and being a responsible coach or mentor? Because mentoring and coaching are two different things, as you know, right? Coaching is enabling. Coaching is staying on the sidelines and saying, here's what you should do. Open-ended questions. Should you do this? Should you do that? Where mentorship is, hey, let's do it together so that I can show you what good looks like. I can show you my experience. And so a lot of when there's conflicts or situation, I always look to the leader and say, okay, are you enabling or are you causing risk? And if you are, what are you choosing to do? Are you choosing to mentor or are you choosing to coach? What's the best situation for that? What's the benefit? How are you facilitating work or elevating the individual? Because if this is all brand new to them and you've not set proper expectation, direction, support, and open lines of communication, they're doomed for failure. And if they fail, you fail. Because leader is the first person there. When the sickle comes in, that's your head, big guy. Right? So what I'm saying is that, so be kind and courteous and really, and so we have a list of questions, kind of like a little handbook or playbook to say, well, what am I rescuing or am I being responsible? And if I'm being responsible, should I coach or mentor? There's a few questions that people tend to auto-evaluate and say, okay, this is what I have to do for Esther, right? To give her direction. Because the relationship is more important than the performance. And I think that Esther caught that in her example as well, is that the relationship between, and then you get more frustrated because I'm sure that the subordinate or the supervisor, that the leader that you're mentioning, got all the kudos for all the hard work that this other lady was doing because it was being done behind the scenes. I mean, that's what I would assume in your scenario that you're talking about, right? People, I'll just do it. I'll do it. Well, are you facilitating? Are you elevating? And then all of a sudden you go, oh, I'm sick of this. I do all the work and everybody takes the credit for it. Well, it's kind of your fault. Kind of your fault on that one. So what was in your history, what's the one piece of referral, maybe a book, maybe a person that has influenced you in your thought process that you always go back to? So for me, I'll give you an example. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm dyslexic. I have a hard time reading. I loved how it was framed. And first things first is something that I, to this day, still apply. I always reprioritize. Is this more important than this? What's more important? So that's, for me, is the first and only priorities, and constantly changing. What is the reference or the person or the experience that shaped you that you always refer back to, Esther?
I mean, in terms of a book or a resource, there's several. One of them, I would say, to pick one, is Dr. Susan David, who wrote a book called Emotional Agility, which I think should be a must read for everyone. And Mark Brackett's work also, who's who actually is I think he's the head of emotional intelligence for Yale. That's what for some reason I couldn't get it out. For Yale, has great work too. And so Dr. Susan David's book I love too, especially because she talks about the concept of emotional granularity, and she she's written about emotions in a way that I've never seen anyone else write about them until Mark Brackett. And Mark Brackett's Permission to Feel is the book that he wrote, which I thought was very profound as well. So those two are books that I go to all the time. And I think that it should be required reading, frankly, for everybody.
And what's the key principle out of either of those that you go, that's what I go back all the time.
Well, there's two things. If we're talking about Susan David, I would say that she's written a lot about this concept around emotional courage and emotional granularity, about how do you get super clear on our emotions to give us direction. And one example that she gives is, let's say a leader of a team is about to go into a meeting and he says, my team is actually quite angry about what's just happened. And I am as well. Well, it's very different if you say they're angry, I'm angry, rather than if you say the team just came together over the last 3 months. They really don't know each other very well. They just worked on a project together that had shades of working and not working, because I think people were very frustrated. They didn't really know each other. They were disappointed. They were sad that they weren't able to reach the level of performance they did because they didn't have the relationships and the roles were unclear. Well, that's a lot different than going in that everyone's angry.
Agreed.
So that level of emotional granularity helps things. And she also talks about the narrative, the interpretation of things that we tell ourselves, because that actually helps shape our decision-making, our creativity, our innovation, our physical and mental health. And then Mark Brackett actually talks a lot about this emotional management or social emotional learning. And he talks about this concept of moving from therapist to curiosity pilot, which I love that idea. And so those are two things that I go to very much, because very much in alignment with what we do at the Ready Zone when we talk about being action ready, which I always call the foundation of the house, which is, it's funny because I had a conversation this morning with an executive in an entertainment company, and she said, why did you name that zone action ready? And I said, because emotions are what we all act from. We all act from our emotions. And so unless we put a spotlight on it, to do several things about it. Number one is be emotionally granular, like Dr. Susan David says, which I think is brilliant. And we actually get very, very super clear on what it is. Then we're able to go ahead and either really be able, not to fix it, but to be able to know what to do next, or to know what to do about it, or to know how to be in it. And I frankly think that we need to do more being than doing first, but we know how to be within the emotion, and then we know how to lean. I had another leader say to me, it was so funny because we were talking about the emotional side of leadership, and she said, it's too much for me. It's too mushy. It's too gushy. I can't do it anymore. She works for a major sports brand. And I said, well, isn't this what you're leading to every single day? And we laughed about it because she has a team that's newly formed and that's just been together over the last few months. And they're just starting to really gel and figure out how they work together to achieve massive goals that they have. So those are two things I would say. Mark Brackett and Susan David.
What do you feel about politically correctness? Because I've got opinions on professional honesty.
What do you mean about political correctness? Everybody defines that differently. What do you mean by that?
So I believe that there's a lot of people, instead of clearly stating and having courageous communication, right? So lack of performance, right? They tend to not want to have the hard conversations because there's so many emotions attached to it, right? So when I think of think, feel, do, right, the emotion of scared or having that conversation, I believe that we have gone down this path of having to bubble wrap everything to not clearly state what the issue is in the relationship at work. So if somebody's underperforming, they tend to let it go, or the leader says, well, you know what, you're struggling with this, or we're not achieving targets. Then they rely on the hard data to try and pinpoint and find the mistake that somebody is doing, instead of just having that conversation. So that's what I mean by politically correctness. They tend to not want to have that courageous communication. What do you feel about that? How do you think about it?
Well, it's what you're talking about is a few things, but I'll just boil it down to this. I think it basically comes down to our reticence to have conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to dismantle what conflict is. And the heart of it, and we talk a lot about this in Connect Ready, is how you prepare for those conversations. And so we advocate for preparing for conversations in very, very different ways. We have a formula affectionately call it the 5 A's, which is aware, accurate, acquire, accountability, and action. And what that basically means is before you have any conversation that could feel a bit squirrely, you have to ask yourself, what am I feeling? And to be able to actually write it down, not to think through it, but to write it down, and write until you're dry, meaning just write it out. And you can hold dichotomies of feelings simultaneously. You can be happy and sad all at the same time. Accurate, what's the truth? Is it accurate or my own personal interpretation? So now that you're able to journal all your emotions out, what's the real truth of that? Is it accurate? Third is acquire, is what learning am I meant to acquire from this situation? And then fourth is accountability. What is my part? I find that every situation that anyone's ever in, there's at least 1% of them in it. And so what responsibility can you take for your part? And then the last thing is, what proactive action can I take? And sometimes it's actually not to have the conversation. Lots of times we feel like because someone's done something in a certain way, we have to address it. It could be that you're not supposed to. It could be that it's more than you plus other people that have to address it. So I've seen time and time again when I use the 5A formula, we use the 5A formula. I've had thousands of people use this formula personally and professionally. It makes every conversation different. Every conversation different.
I think the one thing that I hear from this is that as a leader, you have to lead first and engage in it. If you feel, go through the process, right? For me, is to take that self-reflection and say, okay, I'm having a conversation. I'm going to ask myself the 5 A's, right? So that personal leadership, people tend to say, oh, well, leadership is about others, but no, it's really about holding yourself accountable to what you need to deliver for others. And that's the key thing about leadership. People think, oh, you're the boss, you're the manager, you tell people what to do. No, I lead because I lead from the front. The French army has a saying, the French Foreign Legion has a saying, and I'll translate it. It is, when the leader stops, the followers sit. When the leader sits, the followers rest. When the leader doubts, the followers despair. And so leading from the front, leading to be first, right? To be first to do something, to be first to taking your, one of the episodes with Ryan Hardmarsh, we talked about it before, put your mask on first, right? Even the airlines tell you, if you want to be a good parent, because you're traveling with somebody, maybe you're traveling with your one of your kids or your mother who's elderly or something like that. And it says, be a leader, put your mask on so that you can help others. So put the oxygen on first. So you need to put the oxygen on first when it comes to, the ready zone is to say, well, what questions do I have to ask myself to be able to demonstrate what the right behaviors are within the organization?
Well, it's also you taking responsibility for your communication. I mean,
True.
if you're going whenever someone has a conversation to which they don't want to have, there's lots of things that happen. There's lots of great data around this too, about the absolute terrible impacts of refusing to have conversations. But what happens is, in a conversation, I bring my emotional baggage, and so do you, and including my culture, my past, my history, and you do the same. So what engages in a conversation actually is not you and I from present. So what the 5 A's do is they allow you to clear so that you can actually be present in the conversation. So whatever then comes on the other side or what gets triggered, you are able to very artfully maneuver and ask and lean in with curiosity that you can be much more effective in the conversation rather than being triggered. Not saying that you won't be triggered, but rather than being triggered and then having the trigger on top of lots of other triggers, and then you have nowhere to maneuver. And so it's a way to create resilience and dexterity in your communication.
Graham North, one of the guys that, a great marketing guy, he always says when he does branding exercise, come into the room thinking that you're wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So just come in with as little ego as possible and come in like, okay, teach me something. Like, I don't know. And I think that's a great sign of leadership as well. When you surround yourself with people and you go, I'll use my words, I'm the stupidest guy in the room. And I go, but that's how I want to surround myself. I want to surround myself with people who I am learning from, right? Our three core values, and well, I should more like brand promises and mottos, are ignite curiosity, crystallize thinking, and concentrate action. And it's important to ignite. I like the action, the verb. You have to turn it on. Curious is I'm curious, but ignite it, like really turn it on. Go like, okay,
Absolutely.
so Esther, tell me a little bit more, and then crystallize your thinking. So I mean, okay, yeah, I've brainstormed all of this together. Let's really crystallize where we get, so we come up with a point, and then concentrate your action. It falls in line. I repeat it, I think, at every show, but what Tim Ferriss wrote in Deal in his 4-hour work week way back when was the acronym DEAL: direction, elimination, automation to liberation. When you apply that principle to relationships, right? Where do we want, what do we want to achieve, Esther and Martin? What do we want to achieve? That's direction. That's clear direction. Let's eliminate everything else that's not relative to the conversation that we're having. Okay. Let's automate it. Okay. So what are you talking about? What am I talking about? What, to ultimately liberate ourselves and say, okay, yeah, great. We've cleared the static. You know where I'm going. You know where I'm coming from. And just through simple discussion and conversation, there's a betterment of the relationship. Therefore, there's a betterment of production in our simple kind of. There's one topic that I want to cover that before we leave. At the end of the title, it says something that how to lead through, what's the title of the show? Stuff that you did not want to inherit.
Change you didn't ask for.
You didn't ask for. So what's the biggest problem, issue that through your journey with the Ready Zone that your clients have said, hey, I did not ask for this? What is the one thing, if you can remember, one or two problems or issues that they feel that I was not ready for this, I did not ask for this? What's that common theme? Is there one?
COVID. But joking aside, I would say in recent time, over the last 12, 18 months, it's all the reorganizations. We work with companies that have gone through massive levels of reorganizations. And so just as people's roles and jobs were getting a bit more steady, there have been lots of different reorganizations. And once there's the reorganization of some companies in terms of just merging two behemoth companies, and then there's all the small mergers within that, including merging teams, merging workloads, merging processes. So I would say that that's one of the biggest things over the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah. And I'm sure that has put major impacts on leaders as well.
Absolutely.
How do I do this?
Absolutely.
Leading change. Oh,
yeah.
And it's just going to get on more and more. I think as technology, we're talking about this at a barbecue on the weekend, is to say back, not even that far ago, like 40, 30 years ago, like you own a door company, you made doors. That's it. And you say, I'm good for the next 40 years making doors. Now you go, oh my, let's change. Well, we don't make doors this way. We make doors this way now. And now we may change this and we change that. If you're not, and I don't want to say the word pivot too loosely, because pivoting is very big. And I think it's become a buzzword more than anything else. pivot is something big. It's like, okay, like we're going in this direction. Now we have to put almost like a 45 to a 90. That's a big decision. And there's big implications to doing pivot. And I think that your being pivot ready is there too. That's that resilience, right? Saying, okay, let's stay nimble. Let's keep on doing, double unders and skipping the rope so that we're fast on our feet and we can change things around. I think that's a key topic, is being change ready. Because nothing, as we've learned through COVID, there's nothing set in stone anymore. Nothing.
No, I agree. Very much so. Yeah.
Nothing. The one consistent is human relations.
That's 100%. 100%.
100. Yeah. Thank you very, very much, Esther, for being on the show today. I think for those who are listening, you guys can hear, guys, men and women, pardon me. I always tend to do that. Men and women who are listening, you can hear the enthusiasm, and then Esther and I just go on these riffs, and we're passionate about it. So thank you very much, Esther, for being on the show. How do people get a hold of you?
Easy enough. You go to thereadyzone.com, TheReadyZone.com, and you can download also there our free book, Better Leaders, Better People, Better Results, How to Thrive. 6 eye-opening strategies to thrive through change you didn't ask for. So you can go download that there.
And I'm assuming you're on LinkedIn as well?
Yep. You can find me there too.
Fabulous. Thank you very much again. And then with that said, my name is Martin Hunter. I'm the host of What CEOs Talk About. So thank you for being on the show. Please like, subscribe, and I don't know what's the other thing that people have to do. Click the bell or something like that on. With that said, thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes, or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.